My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 34 years old. And the day my husband, his mistress, and his own mother stood in that courtroom laughing at me, they had no idea I was about to destroy all three of their lives with a single piece of paper. At my divorce hearing, my husband Victor leaned back in his chair, smirked at me with those cold eyes, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You'll never touch my money again, Rachel. Not 1 cent." His mistress, Gabriella, sat right behind him like she already owned my life. She touched his shoulder, smiled at me with fake pity, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "That's right, honey." They thought they'd won. My mother-in-law, Constance, sat beside Gabriella, nodding approvingly like I was trash being taken out. But then, the judge opened the letter my lawyer handed her. She read it. Her eyes went wide, and then she did something that made the entire courtroom go silent. She burst out laughing, not a polite chuckle, a real deep belly laugh. She looked straight at my husband and said one word, "Checkmate." If you want to know how a broke, humiliated housewife brought down her billionaire husband, his manipulative mistress, and his cruel mother-in-law all at once, stay with me. But first, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and comment below what city you're watching from. Your support means everything. Now, let me tell you how this nightmare began. 8 years ago, I thought I had won the lottery. Victor Morgan was everything I dreamed of. Successful, charming, wealthy, beyond imagination. He swept me off my feet with his confidence and his promises of a perfect life together. We lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, marble floors, designer furniture that cost more than most people's cars. I wore dresses from Paris and attended galas where champagne flowed like water. I thought I was living a fairy tale. I was actually living in a cage made of gold. It started so subtly I didn't even notice it happening. I was working at a marketing agency downtown when we got married. I love my job. The creative challenges, the sense of accomplishment when a campaign succeeded. I was making decent money, around $60,000 a year. Not Victor's kind of money, but enough to feel independent. But Victor had other ideas. "Darling," he said one evening over dinner at our favorite French restaurant, "we don't need your little salary. Focus on being Mrs. Morgan. Make our home beautiful. Isn't that what you really want?" The way he said little salary made my cheeks burn. I looked around at the expensive restaurant, at his custom-tailored suit, at the life he'd given me, and I felt small, insignificant. Maybe he was right. Maybe my contribution didn't really matter. Within 3 months, I had quit my job. Victor took over all our finances. "It's simpler this way," he explained, his arm around my shoulders. "Everything comes out of one account. I'll handle it. You just focus on making our home perfect." He gave me a credit card for household expenses. A generous allowance, he said. $500 a week for groceries, household items, personal needs. It sounded like plenty. It wasn't. Every purchase was scrutinized, every receipt examined like evidence in a crime. I bought new curtains for the living room once, beautiful silk drapes that cost $300. Victor found the receipt and his face turned cold. "Rachel, why didn't you consult me first? $300 is excessive for curtains." I stammered an apology, feeling like a child caught stealing cookies. The curtains went back the next day. Another time, I spent $60 at the grocery store. Victor went through every item on the receipt with a red pen. "Organic produce? Rachel, we need to be more careful with money. Regular vegetables are perfectly fine." I started buying the cheapest brands, stopped inviting friends for coffee because $8 at Starbucks was wasteful, stopped buying new clothes unless Victor approved them first. Meanwhile, Victor bought himself a $15,000 watch. Took business trips to 5-star resorts, had his suits custom-made in Italy, but I couldn't spend $60 on organic groceries. Every Sunday, Victor's mother, Constance, came for dinner, and every Sunday was a fresh nightmare. Constance Morgan was everything I wasn't. Old money, finishing school education, blue blood that went back generations. She made it clear from day one that I wasn't worthy of her son. The flowers in the garden need better arrangement, she'd say, walking through our home like an inspector. This is sloppy work, Rachel. A Morgan home should have standards. This pot roast is under-seasoned. Didn't your mother teach you how to cook properly? That dress is too casual for a family dinner. You represent the Morgan name now. Act like it. Nothing I did was ever good enough. I could spend all week preparing for her visits, cleaning every corner, cooking elaborate meals, dressing in expensive clothes Victor had bought me. It didn't matter. Constance always found something wrong. But the worst part? Victor never defended me. He'd just nod along, agreeing with his mother's criticisms like I wasn't even there. One Sunday, about 3 years into our marriage, Constance brought up a name that would change everything. "Elias, darling," she said, cutting her roast into precise pieces. "I met the most charming girl at the country club yesterday, Gabriella Romano. She's an architect, such a talented young woman, and from such a good family. The Romanos, you know." I saw something flash in Victor's eyes. Interest, curiosity. "I may have heard of her work," he said carefully. "Very impressive portfolio." Constance smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "You should hire her to redesign the guest wing. It could use a professional touch." A professional touch, as opposed to my amateur attempts. I had spent weeks decorating those guest rooms, choosing colors and fabrics with care. But sitting there, listening to Constance dismiss my work like it was trash, I felt my throat tighten. "That's a wonderful idea, Mother," Victor said. Then he turned to me, his expression neutral. "What do you think, Rachel?" What could I say? That I wanted to keep the rooms I'd worked so hard on? That hiring someone else felt like admitting I was a failure? "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Whatever you think is best." That's when my real isolation began. The financial control had been gradual, but now Victor started cutting me off from everything else. "Budget constraints," he'd say when I mentioned meeting friends for lunch. "We need to be more careful with spending." But there was money for his business dinners, money for his golf club membership, money for everything Victor wanted. I stopped seeing my friends, stopped having my own credit cards, stopped having any access to our joint accounts. I went from being a professional woman with her own career and income to a prisoner in a golden cage. And the worst part? I let it happen. I believed Victor when he said he was protecting me, taking care of me, making life easier. I was so stupid. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I ignored it. Victor came home late one Tuesday evening, and there was a new cologne, not the one I'd bought him for Christmas. Something expensive and musky that I didn't recognize. "New cologne?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I kissed his cheek. "Sample from the store," he said quickly. Too quickly. They were handing them out. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted so badly to believe him. Then I found the lipstick on his collar, a coral shade I would never wear. I'm a neutral tones girl, beiges and soft pinks. This was bold, confident, someone else's shade. "The dry cleaner must have mixed up the shirts," Victor said when I asked, and I believed him, because what else could I do? But then I found the receipt. I was putting away Victor's clean laundry when it fell out of his pants pocket. A receipt from Bella Nata, the expensive Italian restaurant where Victor had taken me for our 3rd anniversary. The restaurant he'd told me we couldn't afford to visit anymore because we needed to save money. The date on the receipt was from last Tuesday. The same Tuesday, Victor had told me he was working late on paperwork. The bill was $847 for 2 people. Champagne, lobster, chocolate souffle. All the things Victor said were too expensive when I'd suggested going there for our anniversary last year. My hands shook as I held that slip of paper. He'd lied to me, directly, confidently lied to my face. That night, when Victor came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, I didn't say anything. I smiled. asked about his day, served him the dinner I'd spent hours preparing, and I listened to him lie about his boring day at the office. But inside, something had broken. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I followed him. I put on dark jeans and a baseball cap, feeling ridiculous like I was in some spy movie. But I had to know. I had to see the truth with my own eyes. I parked across from Victor's office building and waited. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. What was I doing? Following my own husband like some paranoid crazy person? At 11:30, Victor walked out of his building, but he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him. Tall, blonde, stunning in a way that made my stomach hurt. She wore a red coat that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Everything about her screamed money, success, confidence, everything I wasn't. They got into Victor's Mercedes together, laughing about something. The woman put her hand on Victor's arm as they talked, and Victor smiled at her. That smile, the one he used to give me when we first met, before I became just another piece of furniture in his perfect life. I followed them through the city, staying far enough back that they wouldn't notice me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. They went to Bella Note. Of course they did. I parked across the street and watched through the restaurant's large windows. They sat at a corner table, the same table where Victor had proposed to me 6 years ago. They held hands over the white tablecloth. The woman laughed at something Victor said, touching his face with such tenderness it felt like a knife in my chest. Then Victor took her hand and kissed her palm, slowly, intimately, the way he used to kiss mine. I sat in my car and watched my husband have a romantic lunch with another woman at our anniversary restaurant. I watched him live the life he'd told me we couldn't afford, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. When they finally left 2 hours later, Victor walked her to a silver BMW. He kissed her goodbye. Not a quick peck. A real kiss that lasted long enough for 3 people to walk past them on the sidewalk. That afternoon, Victor came home at his usual time with a story about a difficult client meeting. He complained about how boring his day had been. I nodded, smiled, served him dinner, and I didn't say a word about what I'd seen, because I knew if I confronted him, he'd find a way to make it my fault, make me believe I was crazy, that I'd misunderstood what I saw. So instead, I started gathering evidence. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at following them. I learned their routine like I was studying for a final exam. Tuesdays and Thursdays, lunch dates at expensive restaurants. Fridays, dinner at wine bars and jazz clubs. Weekends, Victor would claim business conferences, but I knew better. I took photos, timestamps, documented everything. The woman's name was Gabriella Romano, the architect Constance had mentioned 3 years ago, the one with the good family and the impressive portfolio. And watching them together, I realized this wasn't just some fling. Victor looked at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the most fascinating person in the world. He opened doors for her, pulled out her chair, bought her jewelry from stores I'd never been allowed to enter. One Saturday, I followed them to Constance's country club upstate. I parked outside the gate and watched through the fence. Victor and Gabriella played tennis together, and Constance was there, sitting at a patio table, applauding when Gabriella made a good shot. After the game, the 3 of them sat together having drinks. I watched through binoculars, my stomach churning with a rage so intense I thought I might vomit. Constance was animated in a way I'd never seen her, laughing, gesturing enthusiastically. She touched Gabriella's arm affectionately, nodding approvingly at everything she said. And I understood. This wasn't just about Victor having an affair. This was about replacing me completely. Constance had found someone she considered worthy of her son, someone from the right family, with the right education, the right breeding. They were all working together to push me out. I drove home that day and sat in my empty penthouse, finally understanding the truth. I wasn't Victor's wife. I was a placeholder, a warm body occupying space until they found someone better. That night, when Victor came home with scratches on his arms from the tennis game, he told me he'd been moving boxes at work and snagged his arm on a nail. Another lie. So smooth, so effortless. I smiled, nodded, bandaged his scratches like a good wife, and I started planning my revenge. 2 months into following my cheating husband, I realized I needed more than photos of him kissing another woman. I needed ammunition that would destroy him completely. The next morning, after Victor left for a client meeting, which I knew was actually lunch with Gabriella, I did something that terrified me. I broke into his home office. Victor's study was his sanctuary, the one room in our home I was never supposed to enter. He kept it locked when he wasn't home, treating it like some kind of vault, but I'd watched him hide the key months ago, under the base of his desk lamp. He thought he was being clever. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the key in the lock. My heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. What was I doing? Breaking into my own husband's office like a criminal? But I had to know. I had to understand what I was dealing with. The office was obsessively organized. Filing cabinets lined one wall. His desk was covered in neat stacks of papers. Everything labeled, everything in its place. I started with the desk drawers, carefully going through folders and documents. Most of it was boring business stuff I didn't understand. Contracts for construction projects, letters from clients, invoices for materials. But in the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old newspapers, I found something that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Personal Accounts. Inside were bank statements for 3 different accounts I'd never heard of. Not our joint account, not the business account Victor had told me about. 3 completely separate accounts in Victor's name only. The numbers made me dizzy. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving in and out. Deposits that seemed far too large for his real estate business. Cash withdrawals of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 at a time. Where was this money coming from? And where was it going? I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. I had to put every paper back exactly where I found it. If Victor knew I'd been in here, I had no idea what he might do. In the filing cabinet, I found more secrets. Documents for a corporation called Morgan Holdings, LLC, that Victor had never mentioned. According to the papers, this company owned 7 properties around the city. Properties Victor had told me belonged to his clients. He'd been lying about his assets, hiding property, concealing wealth. Why? Why would he hide this from me? Then I found receipts that made everything clear. A watch from Cartier, $15,000. A vacation package to the Maldives, $53,000. We'd never been to the Maldives. Jewelry from Harry Winston, $38,000. I'd never received jewelry from Harry Winston. These purchases were for Gabriella. All paid for with money from accounts I didn't know existed. But the worst discovery was in a folder marked Legal Documents. Inside were papers from an attorney I'd never heard of. The documents discussed something called asset protection strategies. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood enough to know what I was reading. Victor was moving money to offshore accounts, creating shell companies to hide wealth, protecting assets from potential creditors or legal claims. He was preparing to divorce me, and he was making sure I got nothing. Every dollar hidden, every asset concealed, every piece of property transferred to companies I couldn't touch. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated, methodical plan to destroy my life. I spent 3 hours in that office, photographing every document that looked important. By the time I heard Victor's car in the driveway, I had everything locked back up and was in the kitchen making lunch like nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" I asked as he kissed my cheek, the taste of his lies bitter on my tongue. "Productive," he said. "The Harrison Project is moving faster than expected." There was no Harrison Project. I'd seen his calendar. But I smiled, nodded, and asked if he wanted a sandwich. That afternoon, I did something else I'd never done. I called my old friend, Chloe Hayes. We'd lost touch after I quit my job, after Victor had slowly cut me off from everyone I cared about. Serena? Chloe's voice was surprised when she answered. My God, it's been forever. How are you? I need your help, I said, my voice barely steady. I need you to look at some financial documents. Can we meet? We met at a small coffee shop on the other side of the city, far from anywhere Victor might go. Chloe was the same as ever. Curly red hair, kind eyes, the friend who'd always told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. I showed her the photos on my phone. She scrolled through them in silence, her expression growing darker with each image. Rachel, she finally said, looking up at me with concern. Where did you get these? They're my husband's business papers, from his office. Chloe was quiet for a long moment, studying each photo carefully. Then she looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that terrified me. Fear. Rachel, some of these transactions look very suspicious. This shell company, the offshore accounts, these cash withdrawals. This looks like money laundering. The words hit me like a physical blow. Money laundering? What does that mean? It means taking money from illegal activities and making it look legal by running it through different accounts and companies. It's a serious federal crime. I couldn't breathe. Are you sure? I'm not a criminal investigator, but I've seen enough financial fraud cases to recognize the patterns. She pointed to one of the bank statements. Look at this. Your husband is receiving large cash deposits from companies that don't seem to exist. Then he's moving that money through several different accounts before it ends up in offshore banks. That's textbook money laundering behavior. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. What should I do? You need to talk to someone who specializes in white-collar crime. I know a detective who works these kinds of cases, Detective Marcus Rivera. He's very good at what he does. She wrote his number on a napkin and handed it to me. Rachel, please be careful. If your husband is involved in money laundering, he could be dangerous. Don't let him know you've figured anything out. I drove home in a daze, the detective's phone number burning in my pocket. Victor was in his office when I got back, probably moving more illegal money while I cooked dinner and pretended everything was normal. That night, as Victor slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd learned. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He wasn't just planning to leave me with nothing. He was a criminal, a money launderer working with God knows what kind of people. And I had been his perfect cover. The naive, obedient wife who asked no questions and caused no trouble. But as I lay there in the darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Pure, burning, righteous rage. Victor had stolen my career, my independence, my self-respect. He'd isolated me from my friends, controlled every dollar I spent, made me feel worthless and stupid. And now I was supposed to quietly accept being thrown away while he started a new life with Gabriella, built on money from drug dealers and criminals? No. Tomorrow I would call Detective Rivera. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. Tomorrow I would show Victor Morgan what happens when you underestimate the woman you tried to destroy. The next morning my hands shook as I dialed the number Chloe had given me. Detective Rivera, White Collar Crimes Unit. Hello, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My name is Rachel Morgan. Chloe Hayes gave me your number. I think my husband is doing something illegal with money. There was a pause. Mrs. Morgan, can you come down to the precinct this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this in person. 2 hours later, I sat in a small, windowless office at the police precinct. Detective Marcus Rivera was a man in his 40s with kind eyes and graying hair. He had the photos from my phone spread out on his desk, studying them with intense concentration. Mrs. Morgan, he said, after what felt like an eternity. How long has your husband been involved in these financial activities? I don't know, I admitted, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. I just found these papers yesterday. I had no idea any of this existed. He nodded slowly. That's common in these cases. Spouses are often kept completely in the dark about their partner's criminal activities. He pointed to one of the bank statements. These transactions show a clear pattern of money laundering. Your husband is receiving large amounts of cash from what appear to be criminal sources and running it through multiple accounts to conceal its origin. What kind of criminal sources? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Based on these amounts and patterns, likely drug trafficking organizations, possibly organized crime. Your husband's real estate business provides the perfect cover. He can take dirty money, use it to buy properties, then sell those properties and deposit the profits as legitimate business income. The illegal money is now clean. I felt sick. How much prison time could he face? Money laundering is a serious federal felony. Depending on the amounts involved, he could be looking at 15 to 25 years in federal prison, plus massive fines and forfeiture of all assets purchased with illegal funds. All assets? I repeated, the words echoing in my head. Everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, the investments. If they were purchased with laundered money, the government will seize them. My mind was racing. If Victor went to jail and lost everything, what would happen to me? I'd be left with nothing, just like he'd planned. Except now it wouldn't be because he'd outsmarted me in divorce court. It would be because he was a criminal. Detective Rivera, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind. What if I helped you build a case against him? What if I could get more evidence? He leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. Mrs. Morgan, that would be extremely dangerous. If your husband suspected you were investigating him, he could become violent. These kinds of people don't take kindly to betrayal. But I'm already in danger, aren't I said, my voice stronger now. If he's working with criminals, if he's planning to divorce me and leave me penniless, I'm not safe anyway. At least this way, I'm fighting back. Detective Rivera was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I have access to his office, his computer, his files. I could copy more documents, record conversations, maybe even find out who he's working with. I leaned forward, desperation making me bold. But I need protection, and I need assurances about what happens to me when this is over. What kind of assurances? I want immunity from any charges related to his crimes. I want protection if he or his criminal partners try to hurt me, and I want to keep some of the assets that were purchased with legitimate money from his real estate business, not the drug money, just what he earned legally. Detective Rivera smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Mrs. Morgan, you think like a prosecutor. Let me make some calls and see what we can arrange. 3 days later, I sat in a conference room with Detective Rivera and an assistant district attorney named Sarah Chen. They had prepared an official cooperation agreement. Pages and pages of legal language that basically said I would help them destroy my husband in exchange for my freedom and my financial security. Mrs. Morgan, Sarah Chen explained, you'll be working as a confidential informant. We'll provide you with recording devices and train you on how to gather evidence safely. But you must understand the risks. If your husband discovers what you're doing, you could be in severe physical danger. The people he's working with don't hesitate to use violence against threats. I understand, I said, and I meant it. I understood that I was putting my life at risk, but I also understood that staying silent meant letting Victor destroy me anyway. When do we start? For the next 2 months, I became someone I never thought I could be. By day, I played the obedient wife, cooking, cleaning, asking Victor about his boring day. But every moment he was out of the house, I was working. I installed tiny recording devices in his office and his car, devices so small they looked like shirt buttons. I copied files from his computer onto thumb drives, my heart racing every time I heard a noise in the house. I photographed every document I could find, building a complete picture of his criminal empire, and the evidence was overwhelming. Victor was laundering money for a drug trafficking organization run by a man named Dante Morales. He would receive cash payments of $75,000 to $150,000 at a time. Then he'd use his real estate company to buy properties with that money. Later, he'd sell the properties and deposit the profits into legitimate bank accounts. The dirty drug money came out looking perfectly clean. But Victor had gotten greedy. Instead of just taking his percentage for washing the money, he'd been skimming extra cash for himself. $20,000 here, $30,000 there, stealing from drug dealers. And he was using that stolen money to fund his affair with Gabriella. Every piece of jewelry, every expensive dinner, every luxury gift, all paid for with money stolen from criminals who would kill him without a second thought if they found out. I recorded conversations where Victor boasted to his business partner about how easy it was to fool the authorities. I photographed meetings where dangerous-looking men handed him briefcases full of cash. I documented every transaction, every lie, every crime. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Victor would come home each night, kiss me, tell me about his day, making up stories about legitimate business deals while I knew he'd spent the afternoon with drug lords and criminals. "You seem different lately," he said one evening over dinner. "More confident. I like it." If only he knew why I was confident. If only he understood that every kind word he spoke to me was another nail in his coffin. "I've been reading more," I said, which was true. I'd been reading everything I could find about money laundering, organized crime, federal prosecution, learning how to destroy the man who'd tried to destroy me. "That's wonderful, darling. Knowledge is power." "Yes, Victor, knowledge is power, and I have all the knowledge I need to end you." After 2 months, Detective Rivera told me we had enough evidence to arrest Victor and seize all his assets. But I asked for one more week. I wanted to be in that divorce courtroom. I wanted to watch Victor think he'd won everything. I wanted to see his face when his perfect plan crashed down around him. "Are you sure?" Detective Rivera asked. "You've already taken enormous risks. We can arrest him now." "No," I said firmly. "I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to know what it's like to have everything taken away in an instant. I want him to understand that he completely underestimated me." Detective Rivera smiled. "1 week, then. But after that, we move." The trap was set. Victor thought he was walking into a divorce court where he'd leave me with nothing. He had no idea he was walking into his own destruction. The divorce proceedings began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I wore a simple black dress that made me look small and vulnerable, exactly the image I wanted to project. Victor arrived with his team of 3 lawyers, all carrying expensive briefcases and wearing suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. They looked confident, victorious, like they were here for a formality, not a real fight. "Good morning, Rachel," Victor said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I hope we can get through this quickly and amicably." Amicably. As if he hadn't been planning my financial destruction for years. As if he hadn't been stealing from drug dealers to buy gifts for his mistress while keeping me on a $500 a week allowance. "I just want what's fair, Victor," I said softly, playing my part perfectly. He patted my shoulder like I was a confused child. "Of course you do, darling, don't worry. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of? With a tiny monthly allowance that would barely cover rent on a studio apartment. While he lived in our penthouse with Gabriella, surrounded by luxury bought with stolen money. Gabriella arrived a few minutes later, and the sight of her made my blood boil. She wore a designer suit in royal blue that probably cost $5,000. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her jewelry expensive and tasteful. She sat in the gallery directly behind Victor, her presence a clear message. She'd already won. She was already the next Mrs. Morgan. And beside her, Constance sat down with a satisfied smile on her face. She wore pearls and a navy Chanel suit, looking every inch the society matriarch. She whispered something to Gabriella, and both women laughed softly. They thought this was a celebration, a coronation. They had no idea this was a funeral. When we entered the courtroom, Victor's lead attorney, Harrison Hawthorne, immediately took control. He was everything you'd expect from a lawyer who charges $1,500 an hour. Tall, distinguished, gray hair perfectly styled, voice smooth and commanding. "Your Honor," he began, addressing Judge Patricia Wallace, "this is a straightforward case. My client, Mr. Victor Morgan, is a successful real estate developer who has supported his wife for 8 years. Mrs. Morgan has no work experience, no marketable skills, and has made zero financial contribution to the marriage. She is requesting an unreasonable settlement that would devastate my client's business and livelihood." He had charts, graphs showing Victor's income over the years, diagrams demonstrating my lack of contribution, testimony from witnesses who would paint me as a gold digger who'd trapped an innocent man. It was a masterclass in character assassination, and it was all lies. Constance took the witness stand first. She looked perfect, as always, every hair in place, her voice clear and strong as she swore to tell the truth. What a joke. "Mrs. Morgan," Hawthorne said, "can you describe your son's marriage to the defendant?" "It was difficult from the start," Constance said, her voice filled with fake sadness. "Victor tried so hard to help Rachel improve herself. He paid for etiquette lessons, culture classes, even hired tutors to help her understand art and literature, but she showed no interest in bettering herself or supporting Victor's career. Lies. All lies. Victor had never paid for any lessons or tutors. The only thing he'd paid for was my silence and submission. Did Mrs. Morgan make any effort to fit into your family's social circle?" Constance shook her head sorrowfully. "I'm afraid not. She embarrassed Victor at business events. She refused to participate in charity work. She had no understanding of the social obligations that come with being married to a man of Victor's position. Frankly, Mr. Hawthorne, I'm surprised the marriage lasted as long as it did. I wanted to stand up and scream that she was lying, that she'd spent 8 years criticizing everything I did, making me feel worthless, plotting to replace me with Gabriella. But I sat silently, hands folded in my lap, playing the weak, defeated wife, because I knew what was coming. My lawyer, a nervous man named Robert Chen, who looked completely out of his depth, attempted a weak cross-examination. "Mrs. Morgan, isn't it true that your son controlled all the finances in his marriage?" Constance smiled indulgently. "Victor handled the money because he's good with finances. Rachel showed no interest in learning about such things. She preferred to spend rather than save. And isn't it true that you encouraged your son's relationship with Ms. Romano?" Constance's eyes flashed with anger, and I saw a glimpse of the vicious woman beneath the society lady veneer. "I have no idea what you're implying, Mr. Chen." Robert quickly sat down, clearly intimidated. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that his weak performance was part of the plan, but I just looked down at my hands and tried to appear defeated. Next, Victor took the stand. He looked handsome and sincere in his dark suit, the picture of a successful businessman who'd been wronged by his greedy wife. "Your Honor," Victor said, his voice full of sorrow, "I loved Rachel deeply when we married, but our marriage became impossible. She had no interest in building a life together or supporting my career. She spent money frivolously, $500 a week on household expenses, and refused to take responsibility for managing our home properly. $500 a week was frivolous, while he spent $15,000 on a watch, while he took Gabriella on $50,000 vacations. The audacity made me want to scream. I tried everything to help her," Victor continued, his voice breaking slightly like he was fighting back emotion. "I suggested she take classes to improve her skills. I offered to connect her with career counselors, but she seemed content to live off my hard work, contributing nothing in return." More lies. beautiful, convincing lies told by a man who'd had 8 years to perfect his performance. Hawthorne guided Victor through a detailed account of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. In Victor's version, I was lazy, selfish, and financially irresponsible. He was the long-suffering husband who'd tried everything to save our marriage. "What kind of settlement are you requesting, Mr. Morgan?" "I want to be fair, Your Honor," Victor said, looking directly at Judge Wallace with those sincere eyes that had fooled me for so many years. "I'm requesting that Rachel receive a modest monthly allowance of $2,000 for 2 years, plus job training assistance to help her become self-sufficient. I bear her no ill will, but I cannot continue to support someone who refuses to support herself." $2,000 a month in New York City, where rent alone would eat up most of that. Meanwhile, Victor would keep our penthouse worth $4 million, keep his luxury cars, keep his offshore accounts full of stolen money. The courtroom was silent when Victor finished his testimony. Even I had to admit he was convincing. If I didn't know the truth about his crimes and his affair, I might have believed him. I saw Gabriella touch Victor's shoulder as he returned to his seat. A possessive gesture, a public claim. She thought she'd won. They all did. When it was my turn to testify, I played my part perfectly. I spoke softly about how I'd tried to be a good wife, how I'd managed our home and supported Victor's career in ways that didn't show up on financial statements. But even to my own ears, it sounded weak, unconvincing. Hawthorne's cross-examination was brutal. He made me admit I had no income, no savings, no job skills that would allow me to support myself. He questioned every expense I'd ever made, twisting each purchase into evidence of my irresponsibility. "You spent $60 on groceries in one trip, Mrs. Morgan." "Yes, Isn't that excessive for one person? I was buying food for both of us. Organic produce, according to this receipt. Regular vegetables aren't good enough for you?" I just thought, "You don't think about money, do you, Mrs. Morgan? You just spend whatever you want because you know your husband will pay for it." By the time he was done with me, I looked like everything they'd claimed. A spoiled, thoughtless woman who'd lived off her husband's generosity and was now demanding more. At the end of the day, it was clear who had won. Victor's lawyers were smiling. Gabriella was practically glowing with triumph. Constance looked like she was already planning the wedding reception. Victor leaned over to me as we prepared to leave, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You'll never touch my money again, Rachel. Not 1 cent." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the man I'd loved, the man I'd built my life around. And he was taking pleasure in my destruction. Behind him, Gabriella leaned forward and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "That's right, honey. Honey." She called my husband honey like he already belonged to her. Constance caught my eye and smiled coldly. "She doesn't deserve a dime of Morgan money." They thought they'd won. They thought they'd destroyed me completely. They had no idea what was about to happen. The next morning, we returned to the courtroom for Judge Wallace's ruling. Victor and his team looked relaxed, confident. Gabriella wore another expensive designer outfit. Constance sat beside her, both of them whispering like old friends planning a shopping trip. I wore the same simple black dress, looked small and defeated, played my role one last time. Judge Wallace took her seat and looked out over the courtroom. "Before I issue my ruling, I understand there is one additional piece of evidence to be submitted?" Robert Chen stood up, his hands shaking as he reached into his briefcase. For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. He thought we were about to lose. He had no idea what was in that envelope. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling, "Mrs. Morgan has prepared a letter for the court's consideration." Hawthorne looked confused. "Your Honor, we weren't informed of any additional evidence. This is highly irregular." "The letter was submitted to my chambers this morning," Judge Wallace said calmly. "I'll review it now." Robert walked to the bench and handed her a white envelope. My heart pounded as I watched her open it carefully. This was it. 2 months of terror, of playing a double life, of risking everything. It all came down to this moment. Victor frowned, his confidence slipping slightly. "What letter?" he asked Hawthorne, loud enough for me to hear. Hawthorne shook his head, clearly annoyed. "I have no idea." Gabriella shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming less perfect. Constance's cold eyes narrowed as she stared at the envelope. Judge Wallace pulled out the papers and began to read. The courtroom was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the rustle of paper as she turned each page. At first, her expression didn't change. Professional, neutral. Then slowly, her eyebrows began to rise. Her eyes widened. She leaned forward, reading more intently. She read for what felt like an eternity. Victor's lawyers began whispering among themselves, confused and worried. Victor stared at me, trying to figure out what on earth I could have written that would matter. He still looked confident, but now there was something else in his eyes. Worry. Judge Wallace finished reading and looked up. She stared at Victor for a long moment, then at Gabriella, then at Constance, and then she burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, not a restrained judicial amusement, a real, deep, genuine belly laugh that echoed off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to remove her glasses to wipe tears from her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said, her voice ringing out in the silent courtroom. "This is very, very good." I watched the confident smiles vanish from their faces like someone had flipped a switch. Victor's face went pale. Gabriella's mouth fell open. Constance's icy composure cracked, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Judge Wallace composed herself and looked directly at Victor. When she spoke, her voice was clear and sharp. "Mr. Morgan, according to this letter, your wife has been cooperating with the FBI White-Collar Crimes Unit for the past 2 months. She has provided extensive evidence of your money laundering operation, including recordings, photographs, and detailed financial documents." Victor jumped to his feet. "That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about my business." "Sit down, Mr. Morgan," Judge Wallace said sharply. "According to Detective Marcus Rivera of the FBI, you have been laundering money for the Morales drug trafficking organization. You have been receiving cash payments ranging from $75,000 to $150,000, using your real estate business to clean that money through property purchases and sales." The courtroom erupted. Hawthorne was trying to get Victor to sit down and shut up. Victor was staring at me with a mixture of shock and rage that would have terrified me 2 months ago. But now I just stared back at him, cold, calm, powerful. "Furthermore," Judge Wallace continued, "you have been skimming funds from your criminal partners, using that stolen money to finance an extramarital affair." Gabriella gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Victor, what is she talking about?" Judge Wallace turned her attention to Gabriella. "Ms. Romano, the jewelry, the vacations, the expensive dinners, all of it was paid for with money stolen from drug dealers. You should contact an attorney immediately. Accepting gifts purchased with the proceeds of criminal activity can make you an accessory to money laundering." The color drained from Gabriella's face. She looked at Victor in horror, finally understanding that every gift he'd given her, every romantic gesture, was evidence of serious federal crimes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I had no idea." But it was too late for her. Too late for all of them. Constance stood up, her voice shaking with rage. "This is absurd. My son is a respected businessman. This is some kind of setup." Judge Wallace looked at Constance with open distaste. "Mrs. Morgan, your son is facing federal charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and involvement with organized crime. The state will seize all assets purchased with illegal funds. That includes your family estate, which was purchased with laundered money, the vehicles, the bank accounts, most of the company's shares." Constance's icy composure finally shattered completely. She sank into her seat, her face ashen. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Oh, but it was happening, and I was loving every second of it. Victor's lawyer was whispering frantically in his ear, but Victor swatted him away. He stared at me across the courtroom, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "Rachel, you have no idea what you've done. These people don't forgive betrayal. You've signed your own death warrant." I stood up slowly. For 8 years, I'd been sitting, shrinking, making myself small for this man. No more. "I know exactly what I've done, Victor," I said, my voice steady and strong. "You're a criminal who used our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. You planned to divorce me and leave me with nothing while you started a new life with stolen money. You controlled every aspect of my existence. You isolated me, humiliated me, made me feel worthless, and you completely underestimated me." The courtroom was silent, everyone staring at me. At this woman they'd all thought was weak and stupid and helpless. "You taught me that knowledge is power, Victor. Remember? You just never imagined I'd use that lesson to destroy you." Judge Wallace looked at me with something like respect. "Mrs. Morgan, as a cooperating witness in an active federal investigation, you are entitled to protection under the Witness Security Program. The District Attorney's Office has agreed to allow you to retain all assets that can be proven to have been purchased with legitimate income from Mr. Morgan's real estate business." "How much is that?" Victor asked desperately. "How much are you giving her?" "According to the forensic accounting analysis, approximately 55% of your assets came from legitimate business income. Mrs. Morgan will receive those assets. Additionally, she will receive a compensatory payment for her cooperation, and she will receive a substantial reward from the state for her assistance in this investigation." Victor's face went white. He sank into his chair as the reality finally hit him. Everything was gone. His business, his money, his freedom, his future with Gabriella, all because he assumed his wife was too weak and too stupid to fight back. Judge Wallace looked directly at Victor and smiled. "Checkmate, Mr. Morgan." The courtroom doors opened. Detective Rivera entered with 2 other FBI agents. They walked down the aisle with purpose, their badges visible on their belts. "Officers from the FBI Major Crimes Unit are here to arrest Mr. Morgan," Judge Wallace announced. "This divorce proceeding is hereby suspended pending the outcome of federal criminal charges." Victor stood up as the agents approached. He looked at me one last time, his face a mixture of rage, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. "You have no idea what you've done, Rachel." I met his eyes without flinching. "I know exactly what I've done. I took back my life." Detective Rivera stepped forward. "Victor Morgan, you're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, tax fraud, and conspiracy to commit organized crime." As they handcuffed my husband and read him his Miranda rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even known I was carrying. For 8 years, I'd been living a lie. Married to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient cover for his crimes, a placeholder until he found someone better. But I wasn't a placeholder anymore. Gabriella bolted from the courtroom, her designer heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. She was already on her phone, probably calling lawyers to distance herself from Victor's crimes. Her mascara ran down her face, and her expensive outfit couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. All those luxury gifts, all those romantic gestures, they were now evidence that would destroy her career and possibly land her in prison. Constance followed Gabriella, her face ashen and aged. The woman who'd spent 8 years criticizing me, plotting my replacement, treating me like I wasn't worthy of her precious son. She looked like she'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. The family estate she was so proud of, seized by the government, the Morgan name she valued above everything, now synonymous with federal crimes and scandal. The 2 women who'd planned to celebrate my destruction were now facing their own ruin, and I walked out of that courtroom a free woman. I walked out of that courthouse into the November sunshine, and for the first time in 8 years, I could breathe, really breathe. The Federal Witness Protection Program set me up in a secure location while Victor's case went to trial. Detective Rivera kept me updated on everything. Victor tried to make a deal, of course, tried to claim he was a victim, that he'd been forced into money laundering by threats. But with all the evidence I'd gathered, recordings of him bragging about his schemes, photos of him accepting cash from known drug dealers, financial documents showing years of systematic fraud, there was no defense. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison, no parole, no early release. Gabriella was charged as an accessory. She lost her architecture license and faced 5 years of probation. Her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for, destroyed. All because she thought she was getting a rich, successful husband. Instead, she got a criminal. And Constance? She lost the family estate when the government seized it, lost her social standing when the Morgan name became toxic, lost her son to a federal penitentiary. She tried to reach out to me once, through her lawyers, begging me to help her, claiming she'd known nothing about Victor's crimes. I didn't respond, let her feel what I felt, powerless, abandoned, destroyed by the people who were supposed to love her. As for me, the cooperation agreement gave me 55% of Victor's legitimate assets, the penthouse, 2 of the cars, 3 properties that had been purchased with legal money, plus a $250,000 reward from the federal government for my assistance. I was suddenly wealthier than I'd ever been in my life, and this time it was my money, in my name, under my control. No one to tell me I couldn't spend $60 on organic groceries. I sold the penthouse. Too many bad memories. Too much pain in those walls. I bought a smaller apartment in Brooklyn with big windows and space for an art studio. I went back to school. Got my master's degree in business administration. Started my own marketing consultancy, helping small businesses grow. The career Victor had made me abandon, I rebuilt it. Stronger than before. And slowly, painfully, I rebuilt myself too. I reconnected with Chloe and the other friends Victor had isolated me from. They welcomed me back with open arms, never once judging me for the years I'd spent trapped in that marriage. I started dating again, though I took it slow. Learning to trust wasn't easy after 8 years with Victor, but I was learning. Learning that not all men control and manipulate. Learning that real love doesn't require you to make yourself small. Learning that I deserved respect, partnership, equality. Sometimes I think about that day in the courtroom, the look on Victor's face when Judge Wallace burst out laughing. The moment he realized his perfect plan had been destroyed by the wife he thought was too weak to fight back. And I smile. Because Victor taught me an important lesson, even if he didn't mean to. He taught me that knowledge is power. That underestimating someone is the biggest mistake you can make. That the person you've pushed to the edge is the most dangerous person of all. Because they have nothing left to lose. I was that person. The wife he'd isolated, controlled, humiliated, and planned to discard. And I became the woman who destroyed him. So that's my story. The day my husband, his mistress, and his mother thought they'd destroyed me was the day I destroyed all 3 of them. Victor is currently serving year 3 of his 22-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. I hear he's not adjusting well to prison life. Apparently, drug dealers don't appreciate people who steal from them, even behind bars. Gabriella lost her architecture license permanently after her conviction. Last I heard, she was working retail at a department store, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle Victor promised her. And Constance? She lost everything. Her home, her money, her social standing, her son. She's living in a small apartment in Queens now, far from the country clubs and society events she used to rule. As for me, I'm rebuilding my life. Stronger, smarter, and finally free. I have my own business, my own money, my own life. No one controls me. No one makes me feel small. No one tells me I'm not good enough, and every day I wake up grateful that I found the strength to fight back. Did you enjoy my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments below. I love hearing from you and knowing where my stories are reaching. If you like this story, you can support me by hitting the super thanks button so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Every bit of support helps me continue creating content, and I'm so grateful for this community. Thank you so much for your sweet support. Your comments, your likes, your subscriptions, they mean everything to me. On the screen, you can see 2 new revenge stories I highly recommend. Tales of people who fought back against those who wronged them. Tales of justice and triumph. And there's so much more on my channel. More stories of survival, of strength, of people who refuse to be victims. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one, with love and respect. Remember, never underestimate the person you've underestimated. They might just be planning your downfall.